guys, this is Tammy Dunnett, your host of the Leadership Communication Expo, giving you access to industry leaders who are sharing their simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies so you can fully embrace the leader you are meant to be, master conflict resolution, and create inclusive and engaging teams. Today with me here, I have Ashley Yuill, the founder of Inspiring Centered Connections. Ashley has over 15 years in the human and social service field and holds space for and has created action plans for some of the best and the worst times of people's lives. She has worked in nonprofits, corporations, small businesses, and higher education settings. And the one thing that has always held true is people want to feel heard. And if they don't feel heard, they won't strive to hear others. The foundational frameworks she teaches are specifically through the lens of social and racial justice, trauma-informed, healing-centered approaches. Working in the anti-violence field, she has a unique perspective in recognizing and working within the intersections of interpersonal and systemic violence. Her heart's work is to center those who are most vulnerable to these types of violence, which means centering the entirety of the client and the staff member's identity, racial, ability, gender, and more. She has worked with agencies such as Family Resources Center, Kin Shop, foster programs, alternative high schools, state child abuse prevention, state human services, police services, military services, crisis intervention services, hospitals, and more. Ashley believes deeply that the extent to which programs support their own staff directly influences the quality of services provided to clients. Therefore, programs must attend to the well-being of the staff, which is the responsibility of agency leadership. Inspiring Centered Connections is about connecting you to the experience of being inspired and centered. In that space, we can create the possibility of leadership development, a sense of belonging for you and your team, and ensure a continuum of care for those that you serve. And today I welcome Ashley with us, and what we're going to be talking about is supporting our staff, integrating trauma-informed supervision into your organizational structure. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Tammy. I'm so excited to be here.
So let's talk about, okay, so we know that trauma-informed has been popular for a while now. It's one of the things that we're really striving towards so that we're not creating and re-traumatizing people. But what are some of the common challenges that you're seeing managers and supervisors facing when they try to implement this?
Yes, that's a really good question. So the first thing that I want to name is that oftentimes folks have a misunderstanding or like just a miscommunication about what being trauma-informed really means. So trauma-informed it's a lens, it's a framework. A lens meaning it's the ways in which we operate. So the way that I simplify it, I have trainings where I could, have this really long, lengthy conversation, but ultimately being trauma-informed means this, that we have a deep understanding of the ways in which trauma shows up and impacts staff and supervisors in the workplace. And it means that the policies, the procedures, the structures, the guides, the ways that things are done are intentionally through the lens of accepting one's trauma and them being successful, right? Does that communicate? So that's the first thing I would say is being trauma informed is such a buzzword that everyone knows what it means and yet nobody knows what it means. And so the biggest challenge that I see and that I've experienced as well is that most people don't always know what trauma informed means. And they think that it means like being nice or being kind and don't consider the connection between trauma-informed lenses being attached to the structure and the policies and the protocols and the operations and really the mechanics of the way that the office works.
I feel like there's a lot we can dig into there. So when it comes to being trauma-informed, I like that you present this as a lens. It's one way to look at things. And I imagine supervisors are probably a little nervous, like every interaction, they may be worried now with this trauma-informed practice that they could re-traumatize or trigger somebody. And so there's an awful lot to consider with that. What you made me think of though is a recent conversation I just had with someone. So I feel like when you mentioned the policies, the structure of an organization, it sounds like we're balancing that out with a trauma-informed approach. So is there flex in terms of how a manager can then engage with someone? So for example, somebody's stressed out at work, they're looking to have some time off, but they haven't filled in their leave pass in the parameters in which the organization would typically accept it. So let's say they want 6 weeks notice. Mm-hmm. And that manager is like, nope, 6 weeks, I can't approve it. But yet that person is still triggered and stressed out. Is this what I'm hearing is that there could be a little bit of flex here as to balancing out those two?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And what you're hearing me say is that taking a look at that 6-week policy and determining whether or not it's trauma informed. 6 weeks really does not speak to the lived experiences of most humans, but especially folks who have been impacted by trauma or are impacted by trauma. 6 weeks it's really to center the organization. It's really to center the system. It's not to center the staff or the individuals. So what I'm saying is that taking a trauma-informed and a healing-centered approach to the ways in which we actually draft policy and protocol to begin with. So to think about what are the unintended barriers or consequences that are being created by requiring 6 weeks? Because who can really do that except somebody whose life is so finite and planned that they know what they're doing 6 weeks out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I hadn't even considered that. Like, I wasn't making quite those concrete connections when I even asked the question, but you really put that in a great way, that it was centering the system. It was system focused and not person focused. And I think that's what I'm really hearing is the goal here.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And something that I talk often about, what does leadership look like through a trauma-informed, healing-centered, and anti-oppression lens? And it looks like a lot of things. So I'm not saying like, I'm full of taglines, but that doesn't mean that's the whole story. But what I often say is who centers whom, right? Who are we centering? How are we centering them? And how can we ensure that through that centering, there's still workability? Because I think the other thing that people consider is that when you are trauma informed, essentially when you make room for trauma in success, it means that there's no workability. And we take all of the aspects of workability out and we're all just sitting around holding hands, singing Kumbaya. That's not it. We can, in fact, workability really happens when we ensure that nobody is left out, which is a perfect scenario in an imperfect world, which means we have to strive for that. And that is the responsibility of agency and organizational leadership.
Wow, that's just so important. What you just expressed there and the way in which you expressed it, I think is going to really land with our leaders who are listening to this, in order to really look at where are they coming from, who are they serving, and how can we serve both? Like, how can we actually be an agency that gets the best case out of these situations?
Yeah.
I love workability. I wrote that word down. It's going to be in my dictionary now.
Me too. Another favorite is unmessable with. Those are some of my workable and unmessable with.
I like that one too. I'm going to write that one down here in a minute. So is there a particular area that leaders can focus on? Like, it sounds like there's an awful lot of opportunity just in that one example. That's just one human interaction where maybe kindness can lead, as opposed to, like, where can we flex things? Where can we actually work with people? But is there a particular place they should focus if they're just starting, if they're new to this?
That's such a great question. And the area that I always ask people to look, so it's really funny that you brought that up, is I always invite people to look at their time off policy, because that will pretty much tell you everything you need to know about what is important to that agency and who they value and who they don't value, and the barriers that they consider and the barriers that they don't consider. Because I would say that time off, flexibility, remote schedules, that's like the primary area where a lot of individuals bump up against their agency, and they either and oftentimes they leave or they get forced out.
Yeah.
Or they destroy their own sense of mental health and wellness in an effort to fit within these protocols that weren't created for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing I can see happening, I don't know if stress leave is something that you guys deal with in your state, but in Canada, stress leave is a common thing. So it's like, if you couldn't get the time off, use your vacation time. You're going to go now and medicalize a problem that could have been solved if they just would have given you the time off. And guess what? They still have the same problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I live in the state of Nevada in the US. And so we are a quote unquote right to work state, which means that nobody is centered except for the business. And so, working especially in the anti-violence field where interacting with trauma is the job, right? Like being responders to trauma, experiencing secondary or vicarious trauma, meaning being activated and reactivated by the trauma that we're witnessing and listening to and holding space for. Time off, flexible time off is a huge problem. And that's the place that I always ask people to look first. I say, if you really want to know where to begin, find out what is happening when people ask for time off and whether or not they're approved. And if they're not approved, find out why.
Interesting. Okay, you mentioned secondary trauma. And I'm thinking, as our leaders are absorbing and they're trying to become trauma informed, they're going to be potentially hearing stories. and at risk now of being triggered themselves if they have their own story, or traumatized by having to hold space for so many people. How can we balance being trauma informed and being safe ourselves?
That's a really good question. These are all really great questions. Thank you. And I'm so excited to talk about them. So I'm going to go back to the answer of policies, protocols, structures, right? As a supervisor, it's my role to, yes, hold space for my staff. And it is ultimately my role to ensure that the policies and protocols that we have in place don't unintentionally leave anybody out, and to put structures in place so that my staff can be successful with the job that I am like essentially supervising that they do, right? So that being said, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not an HR representative within my own office, I'm not an ombudsman. And so what has really helped is, you know, it's really about getting to the structure. I think oftentimes folks want a quick fix, and that can work for a minute, but ultimately it's upon the supervisor or the leader and the group of them to make sure that the infrastructure of the agency itself can actually support a trauma-informed, healing-centered, and anti-oppression lens. Because if there's one supervisor who's decided to take this on and doesn't have the support of their own leadership, it's not going to work, and somebody isn't going to be centered. So I've actually seen this happen a lot in higher education in particular, where you have the director of a particular office, which in higher education is still fairly low on the hierarchy of authority. You know, the levels in between the president of the institution and the director of an office, there's like 50 people in between there. So I often will see a director who cares very much about their staff and their office and the work that they do, and has really decided to take on these lenses and really infuse it into the infrastructure of the office, and does not receive any support from their leadership, and they're left kind of, you know, being the support for their staff and then having to find creative ways to get support for themselves. So there is this element of like the support really needs to come in all levels. And if it's not happening, then I would encourage leadership or supervision to really consider for themselves, what do I need in order to show up in these ways? So for me personally, what I've identified, and knowing my professional self, what do I need in order to show up as a supervisor and uphold these structures and lenses? I need breaks. I need calendars. I need consensual communication. I need agendas, meeting agendas. If I have a staff member who's going to come to me with a difficult conversation, they're going to share with me something that could re-traumatize me or activate my nervous system, I need to know about it ahead of time. So I need a meeting agenda.
Oh my God, you just dropped so much good information there. Like, my head is spinning. I don't even know where to go, to be honest. I feel like I'm down every single pathway, trying to grab every nugget you are dropping.
Good thing it's recorded.
I know. Okay, leave nobody out. It leaves nobody out. And I love that that means it kind of gives permission for the leaders to also self-care, that they don't have to have it all, that in trying to advocate for a trauma-informed workplace, they can still care for themselves, and they are equal to that and not the holders of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's one thing that kind of came through for me as you were sharing that, because I do feel sometimes our leaders feel responsible to the point that they put themselves maybe behind. And I do think good leaders are always behind their team, and that they may sacrifice themselves in that process to nurture and care for these others. The second thing was that they're not counselors, they're not HR, and to make sure that they have the resources to support them in building this out. Now, the third thing that you mentioned was if they don't have support in the hierarchy, and they're trying to encourage this practice, which I think is still possible. I know critical change needs to happen in all the levels. I still think we can make a movement upwards. And if that leader is creating it, the other employees will embody it and the movement grows. What can they do? How can they bring, so I think that there's so much to trauma informed. There's so, I mean, you mentioned gender, racial, there were so many things in your bio. I'm just going to go back here. Racial identity, ability, gender identity, and so much more. And so this isn't just about triggering somebody in one area. This is integrating everything. I just feel like there's so much to go. I feel lost in where we should go.
I have an idea. And so, yes. And the idea is through these lenses, when we do operate through these lenses and we create or rewrite or uphold policy, protocol, structure, guides, it's essentially about providing someone or groups of someone's the tools and the structures for success. So I'll use, and this is why, like, really time off and compensation are the two areas that people should look. The first thing that I would say is, how does the agency or the organization define labor, and labor that's quote unquote worth compensating? Very often, especially in the mental health field, in the anti-violence field, in social work, in human service, emotional labor is still not considered compensatable labor. And there's a lot there that we could get into. We could talk about how capitalism has upheld that, how sexism and paternalism and all the isms are, this is why an anti-oppression framework is very, very important in this, and can't be just, a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
How do we define labor, and whose labor gets compensated and whose labor does not get compensated? And very often emotional labor doesn't get compensated. That's kind of like frontline staff in a lot of human service fields. Holding space for individuals is not considered a skill. It's especially for women, or especially caregivers who are caregivers outside of their professional life. It's kind of like, oh, well, you just do that naturally. No, it's not natural. It's labor. So that's the first thing I would say, is to really look at, like, how are we defining labor, and how are we defining the labor that's worth compensating, and how are we compensating that? And then the other thing is time off. Who are we giving time off to? What do we consider a viable reason for time off? What do we not consider a viable reason for time off? These are two of the things that really lead to a person's success, professional success.
And is it in those structures where you find that there's discrepancies related to abilities, gender, and race? Is that part what you see in those areas as well?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, especially time off, and especially compensation. I mean, honestly, a quick Google search will show anybody gender wage gaps, racial age gaps, ability age gaps, wage gaps, right? I mean, honestly, the internet is full of that. And also, the thing I haven't really seen a lot of people talk about is those same gaps in approving or denying somebody's time off requests or flexible schedule requests.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say we're post-COVID. We're kind of post-COVID. I think we're starting to become into that post-COVID era, and we've had a lot of different changes to our workplaces. So we've gone completely at home, and now we've got hybrid. I'm not sure where you guys are at in your back to work kind of progress, but we're getting this mix now of people. And there are some organizations who are making it absolutely required that you come back to the office. And I think there's a struggle there. And I'm not sure if that fits into what we're talking about here in terms of trauma informed. I think it does, but let's dive into that.
Oh, it absolutely does. Something that I ask, I've given a couple of presentations. So I've been invited by offices or organizations who were going to mandate or require their staff to come back to work, quote unquote, which I'm like, they never stopped working. They just stopped working under your
roof.
Yeah. But they, said, oh, hey, how can we soften this? And basically, how can we navigate this? How can you help us get the staff to get on board? Yeah, sure. And then I come in, and it's all about supervision. It's all about leadership. And it's all about what supervisors and leaders need to be doing in order to address this. And the thing that I ask is, do you, as a leader, as a supervisor, as a manager, do you really know the impact that COVID had on your staff? Do you really know the staff who didn't have Wi-Fi, who were caregiving for children under the age of 18 and had those children sent home, who then had to do their job and be the teacher and couldn't go to the grocery store without fear of putting their family's life in danger? Do you really know the experience of your staff who actually live in a multi-generational home, and everybody was sent home and they had to pick a corner of their home to engage in work, which meant everyone was using Wi-Fi and they only had one family laptop? Do you really know the experience of families who are homeless, who were living in a car and didn't want to turn their camera on because they didn't want people to see that? Like, do we really know the experience of our staff? And most of the time, the answer I got was like, well, yeah. No, they didn't know. They couldn't tell me what this person's experience was as in differentiation to this person's experience. And I think that that is the place to start, is find out the experience of staff and figure out what are the barriers that currently exist. Because I can sit here and say, look at your time off policy, look at your compensation policy, but that's the trick, is identifying barriers and then figuring out those barriers. And don't just put all the labor on your staff to tell you. It's Googleable. There's a lot of information out there on what are the common barriers that folks experience when the policy is racist, when it's ableist, when it's sexist, when it's anything else ist. There's information out there. And so I think the step that's often missing is folks, a lot of managers and leaders. I mean, I've had conversations with executive directors who are managing multi-million-dollar and multi-billion-dollar budgets, and they are getting paid big dollars because of the level of problem that they solve. And then when I say something like, do you know the barrier that your time off policy is happening on your frontline staff of color? And they're like, I don't even have any idea how to address that. Really? You can manage these huge complex conversations but you can't fathom how a time off policy is impacting your pregnant cashier's person. Like, it doesn't make, so there's also a level of self-accountability here.
Mm-hmm. So coming back to the Zoom camera, I know this was a big conversation a while ago. Employees, colleagues, bosses were getting frustrated that people weren't putting on their camera. And there's so much conversation around what that might mean, and that privacy aspect for people, the expectations that were put upon them to show up on camera. And when you talked about the homelessness, I hadn't even considered that potential angle. And so I guess that's that entitled part, in that I think a lot of people just assume others live like them, that they have a home, that they have Wi-Fi, that they have a safe, quiet space. How do we start to bring in awareness in a way that actually fosters this trauma-informed approach?
That's a good question. I don't experience the things that I named. I have a home, I have Wi-Fi, I have privacy. So as supervisors, we really need to start believing the lived experiences of our staff, because all the things that I really quickly rattled off are lived experiences.
Yeah.
And when I hear that, I'm also an advocate. That is my work at heart. That's how I started off, was as an advocate, as an immigration resource advocate, and then as a, domestic violence and sexual assault advocate. So really my job has always been, if you tell me your experience, like, I validate that. Now, I'm not here to say that we have to believe every single thing that's told to us. That's often the thing that people say, is like, oh my gosh, what if people lie? But people don't lie about their lived experience when we give them the space to tell the truth without shame. And so and speaking as a supervisor, a manager, as a leader, I would say start with what you can control. If you only supervise one person, or you're the co-lead, right? You're a team lead, and you've only got 2 people that you're responsible for. Got it. That's 2 people. That's 2 people whose experience that you could really start getting curious about and figure out in reality, what was their life like, and what is it still like, and what does coming back actually mean for them, and start with that and start creating workability in policy. And the reason it needs to be policy and protocol and procedure is because of this. If it is not written down, it does not exist. And if it doesn't exist, staff are not safe. So all these conversations where a supervisor is like, I only supervise one person, we have an agreement, that agreement needs to be written down. Otherwise, that staff member isn't protected. And neither are you as a supervisor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to come back to a few things. I wrote down a few things here where they were concerned about. They might be lying. They may not be telling the truth. And what I love that you countered that with is, people will not tell a lie if they have a safe space, if it's already been safe for them. They'll be honest, they'll be open. And I was thinking, and even if they lie, that's telling you that they're not safe, that there's something about their life that they don't feel safe sharing, and they need to cover it up. And it's not a judgment against you. It's about getting better at being curious and creating safe spaces.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. My girl, you are so passionate. I just get sucked right into it. I want to hear it all. I want to soak it all in.
I mean, I want to talk to you about it too, because the questions that you formulate and the pieces that you're picking out are just, they're brilliant as well. I mean, I really love it. And you have such a gift in navigating the conversation in a way that's beneficial, which is, that's a way of creating access as well. You know, people often think that creating access and identifying barriers, you have to have this brilliant brain. Really, it's just about an ability to ask curious questions and not assume that we know the answer.
And that's what I wrote down. Okay, so I was trying to think, how do we summarize this for our leaders who have listened? So trauma informed is a lens. It's one lens, and it's about listening to and understanding someone's lived experience. And to do that, you need to ask. You need to ask questions. You need to be curious to understand what life is like for them. And then to look at how our structures and our policies and our procedures might be creating barriers to people actually living fully within the organization. And then to validate their experiences and to start there as a first step for leaders who are maybe just starting out with this trauma-informed practice.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything? Because there's so much that you dropped on us.
That was a beautiful recap. Honestly, I love it. I love that. And no, I don't think, and well, I would say the element that also needs to be present is grace, shame-free, right? I mean, we often live in a society where getting it wrong is so shameful. It's so like, oh my gosh, you know, if you're anything like me, sometimes the fact that I got it wrong and maybe I impacted somebody negatively or even harmed somebody is so detrimental to me that I'm like, oh my gosh, lock me up somewhere. I can't be around people. I can't be trusted. And that doesn't work either. I have a very complicated relationship with power, and that for a really long time, I didn't have any. So then when I did get power as a supervisor, as a manager, it took me some time to acknowledge that I had power. And so that's the element that I would say, as well as all of this really coming from a shame-free environment. The thing that I have been doing research in outside of professional development is parenting. There are a lot of parallels, and the way that I parent is really similar to the way that I supervise. And shame-free parenting will just like knock your socks off.
Oh, so for those who are looking to boost their leadership skills, check out the shame-free parenting. There must be some groups out there that they can also tap into.
Oh, yes. Janet Lansbury. That is the first place that I would go. Even if you're like, I don't have kids, I don't want kids, I have no desire. Okay, got it, understood. And parenting and caregiving is at its core. How do we develop tiny humans to be successful tiny humans? So Janet Lansbury, actually, if folks can take in the information that's intended for parents and caregivers and teachers and take that on as like, okay, this really is for people with authority and power. That's something that I've noticed, and I'll probably do a post about it at some point.
Yeah, it's transferable skills, right? I say that all the time when I talk about workplace bullying, and you know, like, because we all have the potential and we all have been a bully. And especially I use the parent example. If you've ever said to your kids, eat your peas or else, like that's a hierarchical, it's a bully kind of statement. There's a threat, there's a condition, there's an expectation, and there's no room for discussion. So it's very interesting that you brought up the Janet Lansbury. I wrote her name down as well.
Yeah. Oh, I have a whole conversation around, punitive consequences versus natural consequences, and just the way that the world, and specifically our country, is obsessed with punishment and punitive consequences, and exactly what you said, do this or else. Yeah. Whereas natural consequences may not be as fast. They're not meant to control somebody and manipulate somebody, but natural consequences are exactly that. They're natural. So the example that I actually use a lot in supervision, because most people can relate to this, whether they had a sibling, have their own children, had cousins, is, that notion of like, don't hit that kid or else I will hit you or they will hit you. Whereas the natural consequence is don't hit that kid. Otherwise, the natural consequence is that it will make them sad. It will make you sad because it doesn't feel good to hit other people. And they may not want to play with you. And when they don't want to play with you, the natural consequence is that you will be lonely. And most people don't want to be lonely, right? We're trying to avoid being lonely. And so the natural consequence is a little slower, but it makes so much more of an impact than the natural punitive do this or else. Because what happens in that situation when no adult is around to inflict the punitive consequence? Then that child really is free to do whatever they want. And the same is really true for supervision. If we focus so much on a punitive supervision structure, like do it or else you'll get a write-up, do it or else this, do it or else that, the person is really going to spend their time in order to be successful trying to navigate manipulating the system, because that system wasn't built to support them. It was built to control them.
Yeah. And I think that's been built into all of our systems, the education system, the work system, relationship system. You know, if you're not happy in your relationship, there's always threats, and, you know, this is going to happen if you don't smarten up. It's in every relationship. So fascinating to share that as well.
I mean, I am an anti-violence advocate, so power and dynamic is my job.
Yeah. And I love
power
that
and control dynamic.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing that lens to it, and highlighting that it permeates throughout every relationship. So, and we know this, right? If you're having troubles at work, you're likely having troubles at home. Same if you're having troubles at home, it's likely happening at work. So that self-reflection piece is so important to understand self, and then branch that out into what we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have a note here about examples and tools to use. Do you have any tools that you recommend for leaders to build this trauma-informed muscle?
I do have some tools. I have tools that I've developed as part of the workshops that I offer. I actually provide tools on how to write policy and protocol and guides, the type of language to consider. I also have some tools that I provide on how to identify barriers, because I think that's something that often doesn't happen. So I have those tools that I myself have developed, and I've developed them through education that I've done. Some other tools I would really consider looking at, as I've mentioned, looking at gentle parenting, or Janet Lansbury, or respectful parenting, or respectful infant education. RIE has some really great leadership tools. Those are kind of the things that come up right away. Is there anything?
No,
You've been doing a great job of coming up with tools as well.
I just had a note here from our intake form that you were going to talk about some tools to use. I wanted to make sure we highlighted that. So these tools that you've created, how do people access those? Is this just from attending your workshops, or is this something that you do an extra?
That's a good question. So primarily, yes, it's for attending my workshops, and I don't want to gatekeep. I think the information is there and it's available. So connecting with me on Instagram or also through my website is a great way to just let me know how I can center you and how I can provide you with what would really make a difference.
Can I just say, I love it every time you say centered.
Thank you.
It has such a great vision after this conversation about centering people. And I really appreciate that you brought that perspective to us today. We're going to keep the links below so they can connect with you through Twitter and your website. And
through Instagram. Through Instagram.
I said Twitter, yes, through Instagram. Thank you for correcting me. And then for those who want to reach out and connect with you as well, where can they find you?
Yes, they can find me on Instagram. I do respond to direct messages. I just know we're living in a fast-paced cell phone world where it can be really easy to find me and DM me. And then also through my website or through my email address, which I can provide you. It's ashley@inspiringcenteredconnections.com.
Perfect. And we'll put a link down below for that as well. Any last words for our attendees? I know we have so much that we could cover and so little time, but is there anything that you'd like to share that I haven't asked?
I mean, really, that's it. I want to offer gratitude for folks who are tuning into this conversation. It shows a real commitment to others. And I think that that's spectacular and really what's needed in true leadership. So even just listening to this and considering that maybe there's something that can be taken from this conversation that wasn't happening before is amazing.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Yes, thank you.